The people who hurt you most were not hiding who they were. You were looking in the wrong places, and they showed you everything, repeatedly, in the moments you chose not to see. This is the truth that is more uncomfortable than betrayal itself. Because betrayal, once it arrives, has a clear object and a clear direction. It happened. They did it. The narrative is simple, but the recognition that the signs were always present, that who they were was being demonstrated continuously in the ordinary moments you walked past without stopping to read them, that recognition requires something that betrayal does not. It requires honest self-examination about why you chose not to see what was clearly visible. You have been taught to assess character by watching the performance, the words, the impressive achievements, the warmth in the moments when warmth is most strategic, the composure that appears when the audience feels consequential. You have been treating character as something revealed in highlight moments, in the grand gestures, the declarations, the behavior people produce when they are most aware of being evaluated. Character is not revealed in those moments. Those moments are the performance, and the performance tells you only one thing about a person, that they are skilled at managing the impression they make on people whose opinion they value, which is information, but it is not character. Character is revealed in the gaps, in the unguarded, unscripted, uncontrived moments that distribute themselves throughout ordinary life before anyone has had time to curate a response. In the behavior that requires no audience because the person does not realize they have one. In the responses too immediate to be filtered and too honest to be anything other than exactly what is underneath the presentation. 5 signs, specific, observable, available from the earliest stages of any relationship if you are paying the right kind of attention. Not the attention that sees what it hopes to see, the attention that sees what is actually there. The first sign is how someone treats people who can do nothing for them, not how they treat you, how they treat the people whose approval carries no weight in their calculations. The server who brings the wrong order, the junior person in the meeting whose opinion will not affect any outcome, the stranger in the interaction that will last 60 seconds and disappear. The person who provides a service, whose function in the interaction is purely instrumental, and whose experience of being treated well or badly will produce no consequence for the person doing the treating. These interactions are the truest available evidence of character because they are the interactions from which the performance motive has been removed. When someone has nothing to gain from courtesy and nothing to lose from dismissiveness, their default orientation toward other human beings emerges without management, without calculation, without the careful calibration of warmth that characterizes the interactions where impression matters. The person who is generous and warm with peers while being cold and impatient with people in service roles is not a warm person. They are a strategic person. The warmth is not character. It is currency, being deployed specifically in the interactions where it generates return. The coldness is the character, the unmanaged default that appears when the social calculation determines that courtesy is optional. Here is the first brutal truth. The way someone treats people below them in any hierarchy reveals their actual relationship with other human beings, not the relationship they perform for people whose responses are consequential, the actual one. More reliable than their reputation, more reliable than their stated values, more reliable than years of interactions in which both people had something to gain from the relationship's continued health. It is reliable because it is honest, because the motivation to perform has been removed, because what you see is what is actually there. The second sign is how someone speaks about people who are not present. Pay careful attention to this. The vocabulary someone reaches for when discussing former partners. The specific emotional charge they carry when naming people who frustrated or wronged them. Whether the narrative of their relational history consistently positions them as entirely right and everyone else as entirely responsible for what went wrong. Whether they build intimacy with you by dismantling others, creating the specific warm, confiding bond of two people who share a target. Here is the second brutal truth. How someone speaks about absent people is an audition for how they will speak about you when you are absent. The person who bonds with you through criticism of others is demonstrating their method, not making an exception for you, demonstrating the method that operates across all their relationships, and that will include you the moment the social calculation shifts. And the person who has never had a significant relationship, romantic, professional, social, where they carry any genuine portion of the responsibility for its failure, is not someone who has been uniquely unfortunate in their connections. They are someone whose self-awareness has not yet reached the level where genuine accountability is possible. Someone without genuine accountability cannot build the kind of relationship that genuine accountability is required to sustain. Watch who they become when the audience changes. Watch what they say when the person being discussed cannot hear. That is, the character you will. The third sign is how someone responds to being wrong. Not wrong in the minor, inconsequential sense that costs nothing to acknowledge. Wrong in a way that is visible, that has been witnessed, that requires the public acknowledgement of error, of fallibility, of the ordinary, entirely human reality, of having gotten something wrong in a context where others are aware of it. This is the observation that reveals the entire interior relationship someone has with their own imperfection, with the parts of themselves that are unfinished, fallible, and genuinely capable of causing harm or producing failure. And that relationship, more than almost any other single psychological indicator, determines the quality of every significant relationship and every meaningful endeavor they will ever participate in. The person who can genuinely acknowledge being wrong, without the elaborate qualification that converts acknowledgement into defense before it has finished landing, without the immediate deflection that redirects responsibility to circumstances or other people, before it has been fully received, is revealing something of extraordinary value. Their sense of self does not depend on being right. Their identity does not require infallibility as its foundation. They have developed the specific, costly, entirely necessary interior stability of someone who can hold their own fallibility without treating it as a threat to their coherence. The person who cannot acknowledge being wrong, who meets every correction with defensiveness, every criticism with counterattack, every clear evidence of error with the energetic construction of an alternative narrative in which the error was not really theirs, is revealing the opposite. An identity so tightly organized around a particular self-image that the admission of error registers not as uncomfortable, but as existential, as a threat to the fundamental structure of who they believe themselves to be. Here is the third brutal truth. People who cannot be wrong cannot grow, and people who cannot grow will eventually, in any sustained relationship, require you to stop growing too, because your development, your genuine, continued, non-negotiable development as a person, will eventually create a visible gap between where you are moving and where they have chosen to remain. And the response to that gap from someone whose identity depends on not being wrong is never celebration of your growth. It is pressure to return to the level at which the gap disappears. The fourth sign is what someone does with other people's vulnerability. When someone trusts them with something real, something unfinished, something painful, something that required courage to disclose and genuine safety to receive. What happens to that disclosure? Does it stay held carefully? Does it produce the quality of present, generous, genuinely attentive response that real trust deserves? Is it received with the honesty and the care of someone who understands what is being offered and treats it accordingly? Or does it appear later as a point of leverage, the weakness disclosed in closeness, becoming the target in conflict, the intimate knowledge given during connection, being retrieved and deployed during distance, the vulnerable thing shared in a moment of genuine trust arriving back at you, reframed, weaponized, or used to establish a position in a moment when the relationship has entered difficulty. Here is the brutal realization about this sign. When someone uses your vulnerability against you, they are revealing that their orientation toward you is fundamentally extractive. That what you offer them in trust is stored not as the gift of genuine confidence, but as potential leverage, filed, held, and available F. Or deployment, when circumstances make its use strategically useful. And the most important question about this sign is not whether it happened. It is what you did with the information it gave you. Whether you received it as the clear, specific, entirely reliable evidence of character that it actually was, or whether you explained it, contextualized it, found the reading that required less of you than the honest one. What people do with your vulnerability tells you everything about what they actually intend for you. Everything. The fifth sign is consistency, not the narrow, easily performed consistency of someone who behaves well in the contexts they have prepared for, but the deeper, far more revealing consistency between who someone presents themselves as and how they actually behave across the full range of conditions, across different audiences, different levels of personal cost, different stakes, different moments of pressure and ease, and the ordinary variation of circumstances that distributed across sufficient time always expose the gap between the persona and what it conceals. Genuine consistency of character is visible only when observation extends across conditions the person did not prepare for. The shift from optimal to difficult, from public to unobserved, from the interaction where impression matters to the interaction where it does not, from the moment they are at their best to the moment they are under genuine pressure, and the management of their best becomes too expensive to sustain. Most people are consistent under optimal conditions, when the expectation is clear and the audience is known and the social consequence for inconsistency is immediate and visible. Even people of genuinely poor character can produce an extended and convincing performance of the character they want to be perceived as having. Consistency under those conditions is not evidence of genuine character. It is evidence of competent impression management. Genuine character is evidenced by what persists when the conditions are not optimal, when the stakes have shifted, when the audience has changed, when maintaining the presentation requires something real rather than generating something useful, when no one whose opinion feels consequential is watching, when tiredness or stress or frustration or the accumulated pressure of difficult circumstances reduces the available bandwidth for the performance, and what remains is the unmanaged default. Watch for the gaps between those two versions, between the person who appears when the performance is running smoothly and the person who appears when running smoothly costs too much, between the values articulated in comfortable conversation and the choices made when those values conflict with self-interest, between the warmth produced for appreciated audiences and the behavior that emerges when the audience is not valued or no audience is present at all. These gaps are not random inconsistency. They are the precisely located evidence of the distance between the persona and the authentic self, between who someone has constructed themselves to appear and who they actually are when appearing is no longer the organizing principle of their behavior. Here is the final brutal truth, the one that the entire script has been building toward, and that is simultaneously the most important and the most uncomfortable. The reason most people miss these 5 signs is not that the signs are subtle. They are not subtle. They are consistent, specific, and available from the early stages of almost every significant relationship. The reason most people miss them is that seeing them clearly would require action. An action, the genuine, consequential, potentially costly action of revising an assessment, addressing what you obsire. Be honestly, making choices based on what the signs actually indicate rather than what you hope they mean is more demanding than the alternative. The alternative is explanation. The generous, immediately available, endlessly renewable explanation that converts clear evidence of character into ambiguous data requiring further observation. That makes the sign seem less definitive than it actually is. That extends one more chance in the direction that the sign did not warrant. That keeps you in the more comfortable position of someone who has not yet been required to act on what they can clearly see. You have done this about specific people, regarding specific signs that you observed accurately and then explained into something more manageable. And the cost of those explanations, paid at the point when the character the signs predicted finally produced the outcome they were pointing toward, was real and specific and avoidable. The signs were not the problem. Your willingness to see them without acting on them was the problem. That distinction is everything. So here's what this understanding demands of you, not eventually, not after the situation has developed to the point where acting requires less courage because the evidence has become impossible to explain away. Now, while you still have the choice, while the clarity is present and before the comfort of normalization reasserts itself and the explanation machine restarts, you apply these 5 signs to one relationship in your current life. The one where you already know, in the honest, quiet, physically located way that genuine knowing always arrives before the explaining begins, that something is not matching, where the signs have been present, where your explanations have been more generous than the evidence warranted, where the version of this person you have been maintaining in your assessment has been requiring more charitable interpretation than honest observation actually supports. Apply the 5 signs, not in search of a verdict you have already decided on, with the genuine clear-eyed cost you something willingness to see what is actually there. How do they treat people who can do nothing for them? What is the language they use about absent people reveal about how they will eventually speak about you? How do they respond when they are genuinely, visibly, publicly wrong? What have they done with the vulnerable things you have trusted them with? And is who they are when the conditions are optimal consistent with who they are when the conditions are not? Answer these questions specifically, not with the comfortable generality that allows you to avoid the honest conclusion, with the specific, named, grounded in actual observation, honesty of someone who has finally decided that truth is more valuable than the comfort of not acting on it, and then sit with the answers, without the immediate reach for the reframe, without the generous qualification, without the "this does not necessarily mean" that your explanation machine will immediately offer. Because here is the final truth that everything has been moving toward. You already know what these signs are telling you about this person. The assessment is not the challenge. It has never been the challenge. The challenge is your willingness to honor what you clearly see by responding to it rather than explaining it into something more comfortable. Stop waiting for the evidence to become undeniable. Stop extending the charity that the evidence no longer warrants. Stop treating the cost of acting on what you see as larger than the cost of continuing not to. The cost of continuing not to is always larger. It just arrives later, with interest, in the currency of time and trust and genuine investment that passes between the moment of clear seeing and the moment the character the signs predicted finally, completely produces what it was always going to produce. The signs do not predict what someone might become. They describe who someone already is. You have been seeing them clearly. The only question left is what you are going to do about it. Stop explaining. Start acting. Your clarity has been waiting long enough for your courage to catch up.